Israel's allies do not want it to attack Iran. They are scrambling, in fact, to avoid a larger war. They are urging restraint. The US has made it clear to Israel that it will not be party to any counterattack. We told you that yesterday. And now we are learning that the US is reportedly not even considering slapping more oil sanctions on Iran. Oil, remember, is one of Iran's biggest exports. Iran holds 10% of the world's oil reserves, in fact, 15% of the gas reserves. Iran is the third largest producer within the OPEC, which is the organization of the petroleum exporting countries. The Biden administration, reports say, is hesitant to punish Iran by imposing fresh sanctions on the oil sector. And the reason is twofold. Number one, fresh sanctions on Iranian oil will lead to a further rise in global oil prices. Iran accounts for 3% of the total oil output. In March, Iran's crude oil exports averaged 1.61 million barrels per day. Also keep in mind that in November, Biden faces presidential elections. And the last thing he wants is to anger the voters by contributing to a rising oil and gas price. Reason number two, by further sanctioning Iranian oil, the US stands to antagonize China, which is the biggest buyer of Iranian oil. Now, I don't know how many of you know this, but many of China's small and mid-sized independent refineries also buy Iranian oil in yuan. That's the level of oil business between the two sides. So while the US Treasury prepares to tighten sanctions against Iran, Reuters reports that Iranian oil is unlikely to feature in the document. That's the bit about economic sanctions. Let's talk about the military now. On ground as well, there is no appetite left for an Israel-Iran war, let alone a wider regional war. The US and its allies are already drained by the war in Ukraine. The US is also leading a naval force in the Red Sea. It's another story that the force is not making much of a difference or being much of a deterrence at sea, but troops and resources are engaged there nonetheless. And which is why Israel's allies are asking it to not escalate the tensions any further. In fact, British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is telling Israel to show restraint. British Foreign Secretary David Cameron is asking Israel to, quote-unquote, be smart as well as tough. The message for Israel from the UK basically is to avoid striking Iran. What about Jordan? Like we were telling you, it shot down Iranian missiles over the weekend. But now Jordan is facing protests at home for defending Israel, which tells you a lot about whether or not Jordan is in a position to get pulled into Israel's war. In fact, French President Emmanuel Macron is saying that he will, quote-unquote, convince Israel that we must not respond by escalating. But then, will the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu listen is the question. Israel's allies have clearly set limits, but Netanyahu may not abide by them. And chances are, he will cross the red line. And the reason is simple: political ambition. And we discussed this at length yesterday. How extending a war or starting a wider war helps Netanyahu in the face of protests and a steadily falling popularity rating. And which is why it's not surprising that the narrative coming out of Israel is one of revenge.
The possibilities available to the state of Israel are wider, and yet we need to do, as the Chief of Staff said, and we will do everything that is needed in order to defend the state of Israel, and we will do it in a timing of our choosing.
Some US officials, in fact, have been telling the media that Netanyahu could possibly throw caution out of the window. Israel could respond quickly without thinking of the potential fallout. Well, Gravitas viewers should not be surprised. So what happens when an Israel-Iran war does break out? Will Israel be able to take on Iran alone without its allies? Whether or not we like the sound of it, Israel is already engaged in a three-front war. The Israeli troops are fighting Hamas in Gaza. Hezbollah is firing missiles into Israel from across Israel's border with Lebanon. Earlier today, Hezbollah claimed it hit the Iron Dome battery in the Upper Galilee in northern Israel. Lebanese media, on the other hand, reported today that an Israeli drone has struck vehicles in southern Lebanon and at least one person has died. The situation in the West Bank is also heating up, with clashes between Palestinians and Israeli settlers. 2 Palestinians have been shot dead near the West Bank village. You see, the IDF is stretched. Can it really afford to fight another war? Also, this will not be an easy war in terms of logistics or even options. Consider this. As and when Israel decides to hit Iran, what aerial route will it take? Israeli missiles or fighter jets will have to cross Iraq and Syria to get to Iran, or Israeli jets would have to go via Jordan and Saudi Arabia. Will these countries allow Israel to use their airspace for war? Iraq and Syria have Iran-backed militia. As for the other route, it helps regional players to stay out. Sources from within the Saudi Arabia government, for example, are already trying to clarify that the kingdom did not participate in shooting down Iranian missiles. You see, no one wants to drag West Asia into another war, except, perhaps, Benjamin Netanyahu. When the Israeli Prime Minister decides to order the IDF to fire, will Israel's allies be forced to play proxies? While the US has said it will not take part in counterattacks, will it really totally wash its hands off? Sounds impossible, does it not? See, the fact is that American warships remain in the region. On Sunday, the USS Carney and the USS Arleigh-Burke shot down missiles at sea. The US has also confirmed the movement of some additional squadron to West Asia. Where exactly the squadron is based, that the Pentagon has not said. But my point here is simple. Will American warships and weapons do nothing as Israel exchanges fire with Iran? Will Washington stop gathering and sharing intel with Israel? Will the British warships choose to not engage if Iranian proxies start shooting down Israeli missiles bound for Iran? Or will Israel's allies be forced to play proxies in Netanyahu's war on Iran? And to get us up to date with the latest coming in from on the ground as the situation fast develops is our correspondent Jody Cohen. She's joining us live on the broadcast from Ranana in Israel. Jody, a lot is being said regarding Israel's plan of action. What are you hearing from on the ground?
Hi, Molly. So today I was speaking with Colonel Miri Eisen, the head of the Institute of Counter-Terrorism, a military expert and former advisor to Prime Minister Netanyahu. Now, she called Iran's attack on Israel unprecedented in modern times. And the general feeling in Israel, and I have to say it's not just from supporters of Netanyahu, but across the most of the political spectrum, the feeling is that Israel could respond independently to Iran's attack, and that although 99% of the 320 Iranian missiles and drones were intercepted, good defence is not the same as deterrence. Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu has reportedly asked the Israel Defence Forces to provide a target list for a strike which would send a message but not cause casualties. And War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz has said that Israel will respond in the place, manner and time it chooses. An Israeli media reporter suggested that the War Cabinet is formulating a response that would not spark a regional war or break up the coalition that helped to intercept those projectiles. And Eisen expects the defensive military cooperation, which we saw over the weekends between Israel, the US, UK, France, Jordan and the Gulf states. She expects that to continue and suggested that Israel's response could come in the form of a cyber attack or an attack on an Iranian proxy in the region or on IRGC forces around the world. Now, the War Cabinet is expected to meet this evening, and it's possible that we'll know more after that.
All right, we are leaving it there for the moment. Jody, thanks very much for that update. And of course, we're coming back to you as and when we have further updates coming in. To stay up to speed with the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.